Hey everyone, big question today. How much does it actually take? How much money do you need to buy a house? There's more than just the down payment. There's also closing costs and some fees that come up during escrow. Let's see how much money it actually takes to buy a home. Before we jump into all the numbers, I want to explain something to you. There are two types of markets in real estate. Um, you're either in one of these markets or somewhere in between. There's a buyer's M-A-R-K-T market, and there's also something that you would probably guess is the opposite of that called a seller's market. And today in July 2021, we are currently in a seller's market. So what does that really mean? In a seller's market, the seller has more leverage in the transaction, which means that they get to set terms more easily than the buyer. So for example, what's happening right now in the market is that homes are selling for above asking price. And because of that, you're going to have to usually bring more money to close the transaction, to get it all the way to the end of escrow to you own it. It might cost you a little bit more because you might have to bid over the asking price or potentially over what the house appraises for. In a buyer's market, it's a little bit different. It means that maybe there's a whole bunch of houses available and the buyer is able to take his pick of what he wants, which means that he's usually able to get better terms when you get under contract. Because of this, you can sometimes have the buyer asking the seller to maybe pay for part of their closing costs, which is one of the costs that comes up at the end of escrow, the end of your transaction. While in a seller's market, you can't ask for these things. So in a seller's market, it will cost you usually more money to buy a home versus in a buyer's market, it'll usually cost you less money to buy a home. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is down payment. How much down do you need to buy a house? Let's say we're going to be buying a house for $400,000. Okay, so we have our $400,000 home. How much down do you need? It kind of depends entirely on the type of mortgage you get. There's two main types of mortgages people get. It's called an FHA mortgage, or you could potentially go down a conventional mortgage. The amount of money you need to put as a down payment depends on the type of mortgage you get. If you get an FHA mortgage, you'll need about 3.5% down minimum, which means 3.5% of 400,000. You can do that math right here. 400,000 times 3.5%, which means you need $14,000. So $14,000 as a down payment for an FHA loan for a $400,000 house. How much do you need for a conventional? Conventional is interesting because there's kind of a range. We're looking at 5 to 20% down, 400,000. So we have a $400,000 house again. And let's just say we're going to do 10% down. So that's $40,000, right? So if this is a first-time home buyer, if that is you, usually people go the route of, we'll just do this as a K. Usually people go the route of an FHA because you can see you need a lot less money to the table to get started. Throughout the transaction, other things come up. You're going to want to order an inspection. They look at the bones of the house and then they let you know what problems they see, where you might have potential issues in the next couple years because perhaps some of the materials look old and weathered. They give you a multi-page report telling you everything about that house. Usually this inspection can run between like $400 to $600. Another thing that comes up during escrow is the appraisal. The bank or the lender only wants to lend money up to what the house is worth. So the appraiser goes out, looks at the house, looks at houses that have sold in the vicinity around your house that are of similar size, build, bedrooms, did that way to determine how much your house is worth. So that appraisal usually comes out to be around $650, and that's another fee that you have to pay during escrow. The last thing that comes up during escrow is something called closing costs. Okay. There's fees, there's other things that are associated with escrow, paying escrow, getting the title transferred, perhaps HOA. There's just a lot of other fees that get involved with transferring real estate from one owner to another. And these are kind of called, they get bundled together and they're called closing costs. So usually you need about 2 to 5% of the listing price of the price you're paying for the home to close on it. I usually say you need 3% of what you offered on the house for closing costs. And this is where we talked about earlier. In a buyer's market, for closing costs, you can ask the seller, hey, can you cover $1,000 of my closing costs? Those are things you can ask. In a seller's market like we are in today, it's not things you can ask for. You're going to be paying for all of your own closing costs. And potentially you can offer to pay some of the seller's closing costs too to make your offer more appealing, to try to outperform some of these other people that you're competing against the house with. So just know that that's why you want to rate it at 2 to 5%, because maybe you're paying some of the sellers, or maybe there's a million different things that could happen. But on average, if we're looking at 3% closing costs, so handy dandy calculator, $400,000 times 3%, you're looking at $12,000 for closing costs. So at the end of the day, to actually purchase a home, the amount of money you would need is $14,000. $14,000 plus, let's just say inspection is going to be $500 plus an appraisal, $650, plus your closing costs at $12,000. You're looking at a minimum to get in the game and successfully buy a $400,000 home. You're looking at needing $27,150. Obviously, the more you have, the better off you're going to be in case if something comes up and you need a little extra money. Having some for the emergencies, because there's always something that seems to come up, is excellent. This is going to be your starting point. Anything on top of this just means you're even more likely to become successful at purchasing a house. If you have any questions, comment down below and I'd be happy to help you out.